The city was alive with the usual hum of traffic, people bustling through the streets, and the glow of neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement. It was an ordinary evening. Jake had just finished his work at the tech company and was heading home, looking forward to a quiet night in his small apartment. Little did he know that everything was about to change. As Jake walked down the street, something caught his eye. A woman stood alone on the sidewalk, her figure almost glowing under the streetlights. She was out of place, too striking, too different. Her long silver hair shimmered, and her clothes were not like anything Jake had ever seen before. A delicate, flowing gown that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, and her eyes, so dark and deep, had an otherworldly quality to them. Jake slowed his pace, unsure of what to make of the situation. She wasn't like the usual people who walked the streets of the city. In fact, she seemed completely lost, her gaze scanning the area as though she was searching for someone. Jake's curiosity won over his caution, and he approached her. "Excuse me, are you okay?" he asked, trying to make sense of her appearance. She turned sharply, and for a moment, Jake felt a strange jolt of energy, as though the very air around them had shifted. Her eyes met his, and for an instant, he couldn't look away. There was something captivating about her, a mixture of vulnerability and strength that was impossible to ignore. "Please, you must help me," she said, her voice soft but urgent. Her accent was unfamiliar, not quite anything Jake had ever heard. "You are the one I need." Jake blinked, confused. "Me? I think you have the wrong person, miss. I don't know who you are." No, it's you," she interrupted quickly. Her eyes were wide now, filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "You're the only one who can help me. You're the one chosen." Jake frowned, looking around. The street was quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he still felt compelled to listen. "Chosen?" Jake repeated, his voice laced with confusion. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" The woman took a small step forward, her face desperate but hopeful. "I am Princess Sura of the Illyrian people. I've come from far away, from a place beyond your world." She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. "I am in grave danger, and only you can save me." Jake was taken aback. The word princess echoed in his mind, but everything about this situation felt unreal. How could this woman be a princess? Why was she here, in the middle of the city, asking for his help? He wasn't anyone special, just a guy doing his regular job, trying to get by. But the look in her eyes, it was almost as if she believed every word she was saying. "I don't understand," Jake said, his voice shaking slightly. "Why would you need me? I'm just a normal person. I don't even know you. I'm not sure I can help." Princess Sura shook her head, her face tense with urgency. "You don't understand. The fate of my people and the fate of your world is in your hands. You are the one chosen to protect me." Jake could feel the weight of her words, though they made no sense to him. The fear in her eyes was real. He wasn't sure if she was out of her mind or if there was something deeper happening here. But whatever it was, he couldn't just walk away. Something inside him, something deep, compelled him to listen further. "You don't have to believe me right now," she continued, her voice trembling. "But you must trust me. I have been sent to you. You are the one who can help me escape what's coming." "What's coming?" Jake asked, his heart beginning to race. He could feel the tension in the air, like something was approaching, a storm about to break. "What's going to happen?" Her face grew pale as she spoke, and her voice lowered to a whisper. "I have enemies, powerful enemies who will stop at nothing to destroy me. They know I've come here, and they know I've found you. They won't rest until I am gone. Please," she pleaded, her hands gripping his arms tightly. "You are my only hope. You must accept me. You must keep me safe." Jake looked down at her hands, still holding his arms in desperation. A chill ran down his spine as he tried to process everything she had said. An alien princess, enemies that wanted to destroy her. This sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but the fear in her eyes was real. And somehow, against all reason, he couldn't just walk away. "I don't know what's going on," Jake said, his voice soft. "But I can't just turn you away. I don't know how much help I can be, but I'll try. If you really believe I can protect you, then I'll help." Princess Sira's eyes brightened at his words, and she gave a small, relieved smile. "Thank you. You don't know what this means." Jake stood there, still unsure of everything, but somehow feeling as if he had made the right decision. He didn't understand how or why he had been chosen, but the connection between him and this strange woman was undeniable. As they stood there in the quiet street, the feeling of being watched returned, and Jake suddenly realized that their conversation had drawn the attention of more than just the night. Someone, or something, was out there. Something that would stop at nothing to take Princess Sira back. The tension in the air was thick, and Jake could feel it now. There was more to this story than he could ever imagine. And for the first time in his life, Jake realized that everything was about to change. Jake spent the next few days in a daze, struggling to process everything that had happened. Princess Sira stayed in his apartment, the two of them keeping a low profile. She never left his side, and every time he looked at her, he was reminded of the strange, unexplainable turn his life had taken. Despite the overwhelming sense that something was wrong, Jake couldn't bring himself to turn her away. There was a vulnerability in her that tugged at him, but there was also an underlying strength. It was as if she was holding something back, something that was just out of reach, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. She explained very little about her past, only hinting at the dangers that were closing in on her. "They're getting closer," she would whisper, looking over her shoulder nervously. "I can feel them. They won't stop until they have me." It was clear that she was on edge, and each day, the tension seemed to grow. Jake tried to reassure her, but even he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Her stories sounded almost impossible, too far-fetched to be true. Yet every time he looked into her eyes, he saw the fear, real fear, that she wasn't lying. There was something else too, something Jake couldn't put his finger on. She was constantly looking at the sky, her eyes tracking the movements of the stars, as if she was waiting for something or someone. The oddest part was how often she would mutter strange words under her breath in a language Jake couldn't understand. She always stopped herself quickly when he asked about it, changing the subject or simply walking away. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Jake asked her once more, "Sira, who exactly is after you? Why won't you tell me more about what's going on?" She hesitated for a long moment, her fingers twitching nervously in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost too quiet. "I cannot tell you everything just yet," she said, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "If I do, it may put both of us in danger. The truth is, there are forces out there that are too powerful, too dangerous. If they know that you are involved in this, they will come after you. You must remain ignorant for your own safety." Jake frowned. "So you want me to trust you, but you won't tell me why? That doesn't sound like a good deal to me." Sira's eyes softened, and she placed her hand on his. "Jake, I promise you, if I could tell you everything, I would. But the truth, it's complicated, and it's dangerous. The more you know, the more you become a target. I want to protect you, but I need you to trust me without all the details." Jake didn't know what to say. Trust was a big word, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had agreed to. His life wasn't just his own anymore. This woman, this alien princess, was pulling him into a world that felt too foreign, too threatening. But there was something in her plea, something real, that made him want to protect her. He had never been involved in anything like this before. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a hero, but in some strange way, he had already made a commitment, and there was no turning back. That night, he didn't sleep well. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It wasn't just his imagination anymore. He could feel it in his bones, a gnawing presence, something looming in the distance. When he woke up, the apartment felt unusually quiet, too still. It was like the air itself had changed. Something was coming, and it was closer than ever. As he glanced over at Sira, still sleeping peacefully beside him, a strange thought crossed his mind. Could she be hiding something? Was there more to her story that she wasn't telling him? Every time he thought he understood what was going on, new questions arose. And yet he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that no matter what, his life was now tied to hers. Whatever secret she held, whatever enemies were after her, Jake knew that he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. The first real test came the next day, when the knock on the door sounded. It was brief, but loud enough to send a shiver down his spine. Sarah froze, her eyes widening in fear. She whispered one word under her breath. Them. Without thinking, Jake rushed to the door, his heart pounding. He looked through the peephole and saw nothing but an empty hallway. But when he opened the door, there was a small piece of paper on the ground, folded neatly and covered in strange symbols. Sira rushed over to him, her face pale. No, they're here. They know we're together now. We have to leave. Now. Jake's mind raced. What did this mean? Who were they? And why was Sira so afraid? Before he could ask more questions, Sira grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the back of the apartment. We don't have time. They'll be here any minute. As Jake followed her, he couldn't help but feel that the world he had known was slipping away. He had made a choice, and now there was no turning back. Whatever dark secrets the princess was hiding, they were about to catch up with both of them. And the future, as Jake knew it, would never be the same again. The tension in the air was almost suffocating as Jake and Sira made their way through the narrow hallway of his apartment building. Sira was moving quickly, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder every few steps. Jake could hear the rapid beat of his own heart, matching the frantic pace of his footsteps. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but the urgency in Sira's actions left no room for doubt. Something was coming for them, and it was close. They'd reached the back door, and Sira didn't hesitate. She flung it open, revealing the dark alley behind the building. Jake squinted, adjusting his eyes to the dim light, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. He wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers from Sira about who was after them and why. But there wasn't time. She pulled him along, her grip strong despite her delicate appearance. We need to get to the car, she said breathlessly. Now, Jake. There's no time to waste. Jake barely had time to react before she was tugging him down the alley, her gaze never leaving the shadows. He glanced back, but the hallway was still empty. No signs of anyone following them. At least not yet. He tried to gather his thoughts, his mind spinning with confusion. Who could be after Sira? Why had she come to him, a regular guy with no special abilities or connections? And what was so dangerous about her that she had to hide? There were so many questions, but all of them felt irrelevant compared to the reality of the situation. Sira was running, and he was with her, whether he understood it or not. As they reached the end of the alley, Sira suddenly stopped, her head snapping toward the street. Jake followed her gaze, his body tensing as he saw something moving in the distance. Figures cloaked in shadow, their movements fast and purposeful. His stomach dropped. He didn't need to be told who they were. They're here, Sira whispered, her voice shaking with fear. We don't have much time. Get to the car now. Jake barely had time to process her words before she was already running, pulling him behind her. He couldn't help but notice how her movements seemed almost too fluid, like she was more than just human. He had seen the way she moved with such grace, as though the world around her bent to her will. It made him wonder even more about her, who she really was, and what she had been hiding. They'd reached the car, an unmarked vehicle parked near the curb. Sira quickly unlocked the doors, and they both slid inside. Jake didn't even have time to ask questions before she was starting the engine, her eyes scanning the road as she slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The car surged forward, its tires screeching as they sped down the street, leaving the alleyway and the figures behind them. Jake glanced back through the rearview mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The figures weren't far behind. They were moving fast, their silhouettes blurred in the darkness, but their pursuit was undeniable. Whoever they weren't going to stop until they caught Sierra. And Jake, for some reason, was right in the middle of it all. "Who are they?" Jake finally demanded, his voice hoarse with fear. "What do they want with you?" Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened, her knuckles turning white. "I told you. They're my enemies. They've been after me for a long time. They're part of an organization that wants to use me, control me. I'm not just anyone, Jake. I'm the heir to the throne of the Illyrian Empire, and they'll stop at nothing to get me." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as the word sank in. An empire. He had known she was from somewhere far away, but he hadn't imagined it was anything like that. And the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. "Why me? Why did you come to Earth? Why me?" Jake asked, his voice strained with confusion and desperation. Sierra's eyes flickered to him for a brief moment before she turned back to the road, her expression clouded with emotion. "I didn't choose you, Jake, but I couldn't go anywhere else. My enemies know about Earth, and they know about you. They'd been watching you for weeks." Jake's head spun. "What do you mean, they've been watching me?" "They knew you were the one who could protect me," she said quietly, her voice almost unreadable. "It's why they've been keeping an eye on you, even before I found you." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The thought that he had been watched, tracked, like some pawn in a game he didn't understand, left him unsettled. The last few days had been surreal enough, but now the danger was real, and it was right behind them. Sierra slammed on the brakes, causing Jake to lurch forward in his seat. The car skidded to a stop as they narrowly avoided a group of black-clad figures that emerged from an alleyway up ahead. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, and he turned to Sierra, his panic rising. "What the hell? Are they after us right now?" Sierra's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge of fear. "Yes, this is what I meant when I said they wouldn't stop. They're relentless." Jake couldn't breathe for a moment. The figures were closing in, and he felt the crushing weight of the situation settling on him. He didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to get out of this mess. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready to be part of some galactic struggle. But then, as the figures advanced toward the car, something inside him clicked. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe this wasn't his fight. But Sierra had trusted him, and there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, Jake knew he couldn't just abandon her. They had already crossed a line, and the only way forward was together. "We need to move," Jake said, his voice steadier now, determination settling in. "Whatever's coming, we need to fight back." Sierra nodded, her gaze unwavering as she put the car into reverse, slamming the gas pedal to the floor. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as they raced down the street, the unknown pursuers still hot on their trail. The chase had begun, and neither of them knew how it would end. But there was one thing Jake knew for sure. He was no longer just an ordinary guy. He was in this fight now, and there was no turning back. The city blurred around them as Sierra floored the accelerator, weaving in and out of traffic with precision that left Jake both impressed and terrified. The night was thick with tension, the hum of the engine and the screech of tires as they swerved sharply through the streets, the only sounds that mattered. Behind them, the figures were closing in, relentless, their movements synchronized like a well-practiced hunting squad. The dark vehicles that had appeared out of nowhere were now gaining on them, sleek, silent, and deadly. Jake could feel the weight of their pursuit pressing down on him. Every glance at the rearview mirror revealed the same chilling sight. The black-clad pursuers were getting closer. It was as if they knew exactly how to predict every move they made. His knuckles were white as he gripped the seat beside him, trying to steady himself. The reality of his situation was becoming more overwhelming by the second. He was in the middle of something bigger than he could have ever imagined, something that threatened not only his life, but the life of someone he didn't fully understand. "How much further?" Jake asked, his voice sharp with anxiety. Sarah didn't answer immediately, her eyes locked on the road ahead. Her jaw was clenched tight, the strain showing in the way her fingers gripped the wheel. "Just a little further," she said, her tone calm but filled with an urgency that Jake could feel in his bones. "We'll be out of the city soon, and then we'll have more options." Jake could barely process her words. Out of the city. What was so special about leaving the city? Was this going to be another of Sarah's mysterious plans that he'd have to follow blindly, or was there something she hadn't told him yet? But there was no time to question her now. He had to trust her, even if every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to run, to escape this nightmare. He had never been in a situation like this, but somehow he knew that turning back was no longer an option. The forces behind them were too dangerous. They had already come this far, and now Jake could feel it in his gut. This wasn't just about a princess running from her enemies. This was about something far bigger than either of them. They sped past the edge of the city, the streets giving way to the dark, desolate highway. The familiar glow of streetlights was replaced by the eerie silence of the open road. Sarah made another sharp turn onto a narrow, barely visible dirt path. The car's tires kicked up dust as they veered off the main road, the headlights illuminating only the shadows of the trees surrounding them. The road was rough, filled with potholes and sharp turns. Jake braced himself against the side of the car, trying to steady himself, but Sarah's grip on the wheel never wavered. She was in control, even as her eyes flickered to the rearview mirror every few seconds. She didn't speak again for a while, her focus entirely on navigating the treacherous terrain. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Something worse. They continued down the winding path until they came to a small, hidden cabin nestled in the woods. Sarah jerked the car to a stop, her breath heavy as she quickly turned off the engine. The car's silence felt too loud, too foreboding. The night around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Jake opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Sarah held up a hand, silencing him. She stepped out of the car quickly, her eyes scanning the area around them as if expecting something, or someone, to appear out of the shadows. She moved with purpose, her feet barely making a sound as she approached the cabin. Jake followed her, his heart still racing, his mind clouded with 100 unanswered questions. "What is this place?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "A safe house," Sarah replied, her tone curt. "It's the only place we can hide for now." Jake glanced around nervously, his senses on high alert. The woods were silent, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. He followed Sarah as she unlocked the cabin door, the creak of the hinges echoing in the quiet night. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, with a sparse, almost military feel. It was clear that it wasn't meant for comfort. It was a place for survival. Sarah moved to a table in the corner of the room, pulling a small device from a hidden compartment in the wall. "We need to make sure they haven't followed us here," she said quietly, tapping at the device. A low hum filled the room as the device activated. The walls began to glow faintly, a soft blue light radiating from the edges. It was an odd sight, and Jake couldn't help but stare at it, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "What is that?" he asked, his voice filled with both awe and confusion. "An anti-tracking device," Sarah explained. "It will scramble any signals they try to use to locate us." Jake nodded, though he still didn't fully understand the technology. But he didn't have time to think about that right now. His thoughts were racing, a million questions swirling in his mind. "Why are they after you, Sarah?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with worry. "What have you done to make them want to kill you?" Sarah's face tightened, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of real fear in her eyes. "It's not what I've done," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It's what I am." And what I carry with me. Jake frowned, leaning in closer. What do you mean? What are you carrying? Syrah hesitated. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jake could sense that she was about to reveal something. Something that would change everything. Her eyes locked with his, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she took a deep breath. The key to the universe, she said quietly. The secret that the galaxy has been fighting over for centuries. Jake stared at her, trying to comprehend what she was saying. The key to the universe? Was she talking about some kind of weapon, some powerful artifact? Or was it something else entirely? Before he could ask more, there was a sudden noise from outside. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching on the gravel path leading up to the cabin. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. Syrah's face went pale. They found us. Jake's instincts kicked in. We have to move now. But Syrah was already moving, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the back door. There was no time to waste. The chase was far from over, and whatever secrets Syrah was hiding were about to come crashing to the surface. You said. The door slammed shut behind them as Jake and Syrah dashed through the narrow hallway that led to the back of the cabin. Their footsteps were muffled against the old wooden floor, but the noise outside was growing louder. The figures were getting closer, their footfalls unmistakable as they circled the cabin. Jake's heart raced, his breathing shallow as the adrenaline kicked in. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the weight of it was nearly suffocating. Where do we go? Jake hissed, trying to keep his voice low. His mind was spinning, each second dragging them deeper into this nightmare. But Syrah didn't hesitate. She pulled him toward a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug at the end of the hallway. This way, she whispered, urgency thick in her voice. We have a small passage that leads into the hills behind the cabin. It's a hidden escape route, but it's only going to be safe for a little while. We need to keep moving. Jake nodded, barely able to process what she was saying as she yanked the trapdoor open. Beneath it, there was a steep wooden ladder leading into darkness. Syrah didn't waste a second. She scrambled down first, her movements swift and practiced. Jake followed, his muscles tense as he descended into the cold, damp space below. The passage was narrow and winding, barely wide enough for both of them to move comfortably. The air smelled musty, and the only light came from a small glowstone that Syrah had pulled from her pocket. It illuminated the walls of what seemed like an old underground storage system. The walls were lined with crates and strange containers, some marked with symbols Jake didn't recognize. He tried to ignore them, focusing instead on staying close to Syrah. They're coming, Syrah said, her voice barely a whisper as they moved deeper into the passage. We have to hurry. They know where we're heading. Jake's thoughts raced. Who are they, Syrah? Who's chasing us? Syrah's breath caught for a moment, but then she answered. They're agents of the Icarus Syndicate. They work for a galactic criminal empire. They want what's inside me. Jake froze for a split second. What do you mean, what's inside you? What's going on, Syrah? What's the truth? Syrah paused too, but only for a moment. Her eyes flickered to him briefly, her expression soft but pained. I'm not just a princess, she said, her voice low, almost defeated. I'm a genetic key, something that can unlock the potential to control entire star systems. My bloodline has been hidden away for centuries because of it, but now that they found me, they want to use me to create an army that will make them unstoppable. Jake's stomach twisted as the weight of her words hit him. He had always known Syrah was different. Her knowledge of things beyond Earth, her strange abilities, her alien beauty. But this was far beyond anything he could have imagined. The galaxy was out there, beyond the stars, and it was a brutal, unforgiving place. And now, somehow, Jake had become tangled in its web. What happens if they get to you? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. He could hear the tension in her voice earlier, the desperation in her eyes. He didn't want to think about it, but he had to know. They'll use my DNA to create a super soldier army, Syrah explained. And once they have that, they'll wipe out anyone who stands in their way, including entire planets. No one will be safe. Her gaze hardened. I won't let that happen. Not if I can stop it. They continued through the passage, moving faster now as the sounds of the pursuers above them grew louder. The muffled crunch of boots against gravel echoed from above, and Jake could feel the ground vibrating slightly with the heavy steps of those who were searching for them. The urgency in Syrah's movements only heightened. She had seen these agents before. She knew what they were capable of. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel. It opened into a dense forest, the trees thick with underbrush. Syrah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then led Jake up the steep incline toward a small clearing. The night sky above them was covered in clouds, making the moonlight scarce, but there was just enough light to see their surroundings. This way, Syrah said, pulling Jake along as they emerged from the tunnel and into the trees. Jake was panting, his muscles aching from the sprint. His mind was still reeling from everything he had learned, but he didn't have time to process it. The danger was real, and they were being hunted. But before he could ask another question, a sudden crack of branches broke through the night. Syrah whirled around, her body tense, her eyes scanning the darkness around them. They're close, she said through gritted teeth. Jake's heart leaped in his chest. He had no idea where they were going now, or how they were going to survive this. All he knew was that they were running out of time. Then, from the shadows, a voice called out. Low, menacing. You can't escape, Syrah. Syrah froze, her body rigid. Jake's blood ran cold as he turned slowly toward the voice. The figure that emerged from the trees was tall, cloaked in dark armor, and unmistakably dangerous. The man's eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood of his cloak, and his posture was one of absolute confidence. Syrah's face paled. Rael. The man's lips curled into a dark smile. You're not going anywhere, princess. Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. He didn't know who Rael was, but Syrah's reaction told him everything he needed to know. This man was not someone they could escape. Not easily, at least. We have to fight, Jake said, his voice shaking but filled with determination. He had to do something, anything to keep them both alive. Syrah hesitated, her eyes darting between Jake and the approaching enemy. Her expression was conflicted, her mind racing through possible options. But then, just as quickly, she seemed to make a decision. No, she said, her voice low but firm. Not here. Not yet. With a swift motion, she grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him toward a small rocky outcrop nearby. Come on, we need to move before they get any closer. As they scrambled for cover, Jake's heart was racing, the weight of the situation sinking in. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a race against time to prevent something catastrophic from unfolding. Every second counted, and the only thing that mattered now was getting out alive.